Have you ever wondered why, in a world so loud, your deepest truths arrive in silence? You scroll, you reply, you move through the hours, and yet something lingers. A quiet tension beneath the surface. Not sadness, not fear, but a knowing that who you've become may not be who you truly are. It's a subtle ache, this existential discomfort. The sense that something inside you has been edited, softened, forgotten. And no matter how well you perform your life, there's a part of you watching from the shadows, waiting. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." So what if the chaos outside is only a reflection of what remains unclaimed within? What if the masks you wear to be loved are the very things keeping you unseen? Here, in this quiet space, we will walk where most never dare to look, into the symbols, the silence, the archetypes that live beneath your name, not to fix you, but to remember you. Stay with me. Something in you is ready to return. Her silence was never empty. There are moments when she withdraws not in anger, not in fear, but in something far more ancient. Instinct. You may see her quiet down mid-sentence, pause just before reaching out, or offer a soft smile that doesn't quite reach her eyes. In that moment, you think she's gone quiet, but what you don't see is the storm beneath her stillness. Her silence is not empty. It is layered with memory, with unspoken wants, with the echoes of every time she was told she was too much, too loud, too honest. She learned that silence was safer than hunger, so she buried the hunger deep, and in its place, she offered calm. Carl Jung believed that the self fractures when we perform too long, that the persona, the mask we wear to survive, eventually becomes so well-fitted, we forget it's there. For her, that mask was not a lie, but a language, a way to move through a world that punished her truth. So she became fluent in softness. She became careful with her words. She learned that being desired was allowed, but desiring, that was dangerous. And yet, the longing didn't die. It simply slipped into the body, into the way her breath quickens when she's seen clearly, into the subtle hesitation before she speaks, into the way her fingers tense, then relax, as if they're remembering a truth she promised never to say aloud. To the untrained eye, she seems composed, but if you listen, not just with ears, but with attention, you'll hear the signal. It's there, in the silence between two glances. It's there in the way she pulls her sleeve down when talking about her past. It's not a performance. It's an offering, a quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, someone might read between the gestures and say, "I see you." Most men misread this. They interpret her stillness as coldness. They rush to fix it, to fill it with conversation or comfort. But what she truly longs for is not to be rescued from the silence, but joined in it. She doesn't want a man to explain her. She wants one who can withstand her depth without drowning. The one who stays when things grow quiet. Who doesn't ask her to speak, but waits until she's ready to unfold. Because in that wait, something sacred happens. She softens without fear. She shows without needing to protect. Her silence, then, becomes not a wall, but a doorway. And on the other side is not a woman who wants less, but one who's tired of asking for more in a world that doesn't know how to give it. When she is truly seen, not through words, but through presence, something ancient inside her exhales. She no longer has to hide. And that, more than anything, is what she's been waiting for. Not admiration, not desire, but understanding. Because once a woman is understood, the mask falls on its own, and beneath it is not weakness or mystery, but the kind of truth that changes everything it touches. Quietly, unshakably, irrevocably, the dance of the anima. There's a rhythm in her that doesn't follow the rules. She leans in, then drifts away, One moment she's luminous with affection. The next she disappears into quiet. You might think she's indecisive, unpredictable. But what you're witnessing is not confusion. It's the anima moving through her. Carl Jung described the anima as the feminine soul image in the unconscious. For women, it's not just an idea. It's embodied, alive, and flowing through every pause, every glance, every shift in tone. It's the part of her that doesn't explain itself, because it was never meant to live in language. It speaks in sensation, in timing, in instinct, and it moves like water, sometimes still, sometimes fierce, always deeper than you expect. She doesn't do this to manipulate. She's not performing. She's responding to internal weather patterns that change without warning. She was raised to anticipate danger, to read between lines, to shift before she's hurt. So her affection is cautious. Her openness is real, but rare. Her withdrawal is not rejection. It's reflection. If you chase it, you miss her. If you label it, you lose her. Most men misread the dance. They call it games. They call her dramatic. What they don't realize is that this dance isn't for them. It's with something ancient inside her. And if you're not listening closely, you'll try to lead when you should be still. Jung warned. When men fail to integrate the anima, they either idealize women or fear them. They see mystery where there is simply depth. They expect consistency where there is only flow. And in doing so, they miss what's real. Because the anima isn't here to be decoded. It's here to challenge your capacity to stay present when nothing is certain. To meet a woman in her dance, you have to release the need to define her. You have to feel her shifting center without trying to pin it down. You must witness her change without assuming she's leaving. The real invitation is this. Can you honor her without needing her to explain? Can you stand still when her energy moves like tidewater pulling back before it returns with more force? If you can, something opens. Not her body, her trust. And once that opens, everything changes, not because she gives you something, but because you finally stop trying to take it. The mirror of her silence. She goes quiet and you assume something is wrong. You rush to speak, to explain, to fix the silence, like it's a crack in the conversation. But this is where most men fail. They treat her silence like absence, like emptiness, but it's not. Her silence is a mirror, and it's reflecting back more than you're prepared to see. When a woman falls silent, she's not disappearing. She's descending into memory, into feeling, into that private terrain where words don't work, where her instincts whisper louder than language. In that stillness, she is listening to herself, to the weight of what's unspoken between you, to the shape of the space you both create. And if you rush in to fill it, you drown the very signal she's sending. Carl Jung believed the unconscious speaks through symbols, through gestures, through patterns too subtle for the rational mind. A woman's silence is one of those symbols. It's not a void. It's a threshold. And only those who know how to wait without panic, without projection, get to cross it. But waiting is hard, especially for men taught that silence is failure. That if she's not talking, she must be slipping away. That if they don't act now, they lose control. This fear drives them to react, to interrupt the sacred pause with questions, assumptions, noise. And in doing so, they miss what could have been a moment of transformation. Because her silence is not a test of words, it's a test of presence. Will you hold your ground when there's nothing to hold on to? Will you let the tension thicken without needing to diffuse it? Will you trust that something is happening, even if you don't understand it? The man who can wait, who can feel the anxiety rise in his chest and still remain steady, is the one who gets to see the truth behind her quiet. He's the one who witnesses the flicker of vulnerability in her eyes, the shift in her breath, the slow return of her voice once she knows it's safe. Not safe to speak, but safe to be. Because in that silence, she wasn't avoiding you. She was measuring you. Measuring if you could handle her inner world without colonizing it. Measuring if you could decode not just her words, but her energy. And most of all, measuring if your presence could be trusted when she steps out of performance and into realness. The weak man gets confused. He mistakes her stillness for distance. But the awake man, the man who doesn't need to be reassured constantly, he understands. The real power isn't in what she says. It's in what she doesn't need to say, because he already feels it. Her silence is a mirror, not of who she is, but of who you are when you're not in control. Look into it carefully. You might not like what you see, but if you do, and you stay, she might let you see her for real. Her body speaks what her lips cannot. She says nothing, but something shifts. A tilt of the head, the slow drag of her fingers across the curve of her wrist, the breath that catches just before she looks away. You think it's accidental. It never is. This is not seduction. It is confession. The body, Carl Jung reminded us, is where the unconscious goes when it is forbidden to speak. What cannot be said, with the tongue, is sculpted into movement. She learned long ago that direct desire was dangerous. That asking was punished, and naming her needs made her less desirable. So now, her body speaks in code fluid, instinctive, unrehearsed, and for those who know how to read it, each gesture becomes a revelation. Her body is not manipulating you. It's revealing her. The way her shoulders pull inward when she remembers. The way her hips shift when she feels seen. The way her throat tightens when she almost says what she shouldn't. These aren't tactics. They're traces. Traces of stories too raw for speech. Of wants she no longer believes are allowed. Of a hunger that's lived too long in exile. Watch her. Not to consume, but to comprehend. Every subtle motion is a doorway. When she reaches for the edge of her sleeve. When her fingers rest on the base of her neck. When she leans toward you and pauses, she's not acting. She's translating her soul into muscle and breath. But be warned, this is where men often get lost. They see what they want to see. They confuse her vulnerability for invitation. They rush in, thinking it's a game. But if you touch without reverence, if you respond to instinct with entitlement, she retreats. Deeper, quieter, vanishes behind the mask again. Because this language is sacred, and she doesn't show it to those who cannot hold it. There is something erotic here. Yes, but not in the way you're used to. It's not about control. It's not about conquest. It's about intimacy that cannot be faked. A truth that slips through her fingertips and settles into the air between you. And if you dare to stay still long enough, if you let your nervousness rise and still refuse to interrupt, you might just witness it. The moment when her body lets go of defense and becomes pure message. No words, no declarations, just the raw choreography of desire and fear, trust and retreat, the silent dialogue between what she hopes for and what she's been taught to fear. Jung once said, "The unconscious will always find expression. In her, it lives in posture, in breath, in the pause between gesture and withdrawal. Can you watch without grasping? Can you feel without claiming? If you can, her body will tell you everything she never dared to say aloud. The gaze that tests and invites. You think she's looking at you, but she's looking through you. There's a moment brief, electric, when her eyes meet yours, and something shifts in the room. It isn't flirtation. It's something deeper, older, a force that doesn't seek attention. But revelation, most men, sensing that heat, call it seduction. But that's not what it is. Her gaze isn't an invitation. It's a test. Are you steady enough to meet what lives behind her eyes? The feminine shadow, Jung's most elusive figure, speaks not in words, but in presence. And when she looks at you that way, what you feel is not lust. It's the unconscious waking up. Because that look doesn't ask you to come closer. It asks, can you survive proximity to truth? She's not seducing you. She's measuring you. Her gaze is the firelight of centuries of instinct. It checks for strength, not of muscle, but of soul. It searches your stillness, probes your silence, scans for the part of you that does not flinch when faced with mystery. She wants to know, will you collapse if I stop performing? Will you try to possess what you can't understand? Or will you stand still, even when the air around me burns? Men who are used to control find this gaze unbearable. It disorients them. It makes them want to laugh, to turn away, to change the subject, because in that moment, they realize they are being seen, not admired, and what's seen is not their charm, but their capacity to hold something beyond ego. Shadow shapes attraction in ways most people never notice. We're drawn to what challenges our defenses. We fall for what stirs what we've buried. Her gaze, it stirs everything. It's not the glance of a woman seeking validation. It's the glance of a woman who no longer apologizes for her depth and wonders if you can swim in it. To pass her test, you don't need lines. You don't need confidence. You need composure. The kind of stillness that doesn't collapse when confronted with chaos. The kind of masculine that doesn't need to explain, only to remain. Because if she looks and you look back, not with hunger, but with presence, something opens. Slowly, deliberately. The space between you fills with a quiet that crackles. In that space, no masks survive. No pretending holds. Just truth. Mutual. Raw. Unsparing. But be warned. If you break eye contact, if you look away not from humility, but fear, she'll know. You're not ready. And the door will quietly, gracefully, close. So the next time she holds your gaze longer than expected, don't speak. Don't move. Just stay. She's not inviting you in. She's watching if you're the kind of man who makes it through the fire and doesn't flinch. The shadow in the stillness. Stillness is not retreat. It is revelation. When she falls into silence, she is not hiding. She is emerging. Not the version of her you've met in conversation or laughter, but the part that lives beneath. The unscripted self. The one who doesn't decorate her thoughts, doesn't filter her feelings, doesn't soften the truth. This is not performance. This is shadow. Jung taught that the shadow is not the dark side of a person. It is the unclaimed self. The parts of us too wild, too honest, too powerful to fit within the persona we wear. And in that stillness, when she no longer gives you smiles or signals, when she stops shaping herself to be received, she is no longer protecting you from her depth. She is offering it. Most men miss it. They think the silence means withdrawal. They think the absence of words is an invitation to fill the space with their own voice, their own narrative. But in doing so, they drown what was trying to surface. Her silence is not empty. It's charged. It's sacred. It's the moment between breaths when something ancient rises. Memory. Instinct. The echo of every time she swallowed her truth to keep the peace. And now, the truth sits with you, waiting. This is where shadow lives not in outbursts, but in quiet. Not in argument, but in the heavy air that makes your chest tighten. She's not trying to punish you. She's trying to see if you'll stay. Stay with the discomfort. Stay without asking her to translate. Stay without needing her to reassure you. Because if you can remain fully present, while her mask dissolves, you'll witness what most never get to. Her becoming. In that moment, she stops performing. She stops editing. She stops caring whether you understand. And what you're left with is not a woman playing a role, but a soul, unguarded, the feminine in its rawest form, quiet, deep, unknowable, and utterly real. This is where intimacy is born, not in the warmth of pleasure, but in the humility of presence, in seeing her shadow and not looking away, in seeing your own reflected there. Jung believed that the integration of shadow is the path to wholeness. So when she falls silent, and something in you rises discomfort, confusion, fear that's not a problem, that's the work. If you can sit in that stillness without solving it, without shrinking, you begin to become the kind of man who doesn't need constant affirmation. The kind of man who is safe not because he's perfect, but because he doesn't flinch in the face of what's real. So when she falls quiet next time, don't rush to fill the void. Don't mistake her depth for distance. Sit, wait, and listen to what only silence can reveal. The invitation to see beyond. Her silence is not a retreat. It is a door, and to walk through it, you must bring no answers, only presence. This is not where the story ends. This is where truth begins. Most men don't make it this far. They flinch. They interpret. They try to turn the quiet into something they can control. But this silence wasn't made for control. It was made for revelation. If you can stay, truly stay, while nothing is said, you will see her, not the version she offers the world, but the one that exists beneath language, the one who is no longer performing, no longer pleasing, just present. And if you see her in that space, without trying to fix her, something opens. A truth that's older than words, more honest than desire. You realize this silence was never about her. It was about you. Because to truly see her, you must first see yourself without noise, without ego, without the stories that kept you safe. And in that moment, you don't just meet the woman, you meet the mirror, and it changes everything.